Colonizer.
Hey all, Space Colonizer here, finally getting around to making a new tutorial for JAWS. Things have come a long way since the original incarnation of the death route, which I now refer to as version 1. The route detailed in this tutorial is version 6. Most versions only had relatively minor changes, and I didn't think full-blown tutorials were necessary, but now enough has changed to justify the effort. Routes in JAWS are dependent on RNG manipulation, and there isn't much room for improvisation. If something happens that isn't part of the plan, then you'll have to reset and try again. But nothing is pixel perfect or frame perfect. This tutorial will focus on performing the route, and I'll explain the RNG mechanics enough for you to understand why you're doing what you're doing. But this tutorial will not include the JAWS fight itself. The JAWS fight is of course incredibly important, but when you get to JAWS there's no more RNG manipulation, so I don't consider it a part of the route itself. I'll make a separate video for the JAWS fight strategies. There are chapter jumps in the YouTube description if you want to focus on certain segments. So let's begin with a brief overview of the RNG system. This is the beginning of the RNG table, but it's much longer than this. When the game needs to do something that's determined by this RNG system, it will use a line from this table to decide what to do. Then the next event to use the table will use the next line. For example, if we entered an encounter on this trigger, our first jellyfish would be this one, which would spawn in the 12 position. If we then kill that jellyfish, it would not drop an item. The RNG values used to build this table are generated in a very deterministic fashion, so we end up getting the same table after every reset. We can use that predictability to plan our actions and get desired results, which is what the route is. Let's take a look at the overworld map. It's divided into an invisible grid of square tiles, which are about the size of your boat. Every time your boat enters a tile, an RNG value is used to determine if you've triggered an encounter or not. Many tiles are land tiles, which neither you or JAWS can enter. There are some tiles that your boat can't enter, but JAWS can swim through. And when you trigger an encounter, some tiles will lead you to a shallow screen, while most will send you to a deep screen. JAWS is also on the map, swimming around. He usually swims towards your boat, but if he hits a tile he can't enter, he'll use the RNG system to decide if he turns clockwise or counterclockwise. Thanks to our understanding of this system, we can control when and where we enter an encounter, and also manipulate JAWS's movement to a degree. Now let's take a look at what we're going to be doing in the first overworld segment of the route. Your goal for this segment of the route is to quickly get into an encounter with a shallow screen and to manipulate JAWS to set up his position for the next overworld segment. To accomplish these goals, we need to do a shimmy of 14 frames or less, follow a path that will end on an appropriate tile, and perform another shimmy to trigger the encounter quickly. There are various ways you can do this segment and be successful, but I'm going to focus on two general methods. First, I'll show you the traditional method that has been done for the last few world records at the time of this recording. After the game start jingle, you'll appear on the overworld at the west port, and you want to be immediately moving down. After the boat starts moving, you can already begin buffering a right input because vertical movements from tile to tile can't be interrupted. Once the right movement starts, quickly switch to the left. Unlike vertical movements, horizontal movements can be interrupted, but only by the opposite direction. This is what we call a shimmy. A shimmy causes you to quickly re-enter a tile you briefly left, using up another RNG value faster than entering the neighboring tile. The importance of this shimmy is to manipulate how JAWS is moving off screen by making him bounce clockwise instead of counterclockwise. This shimmy must be completed in 14 frames or less to achieve that goal. As the shimmy is finishing, quickly switch to a down input so you can continue going south afterwards. When you get to the end of the cliff, turn right and keep going until you get to right about here. Then quickly switch to the left to perform one last shimmy and trigger the encounter. So that's the traditional method, and it's important to know because later in the run there will be another shimmy that looks exactly like that first one. So doing it this way can be good practice for the later one. But now I'm going to show you a new method that I think might be a little easier for some people. Go down out of the port Then turn right and then down to follow the eastern side of the bay. When you start to pass this short portion of the cliff, begin buffering a left movement to start a shimmy. Quickly switch to the right to complete the shimmy and continue going right to follow the cliff. Just like before, this shimmy must be done in 14 frames or less in order to manipulate Jaws' movement. Turn down again to follow the cliff, and then when you pass it, buffer left to start another shimmy and quickly switch to the right to complete it and continue to trigger the encounter in the next tile. These two methods for the shimmies are the same in terms of speed. It mostly comes down to what kind of shimmies you're more comfortable with or need more practice using. Now let's take a look at how encounters work. We're going to be getting into two regular encounters for this route. During these encounters, sea creatures spawn in a pattern of jellyfish and then stingray, and repeat that pattern until they reach a limit of 24 spawns. They spawn at a regular pace, but there is a limit to 2 on screen at once, so if you let them live, the next spawn will get delayed. For example, right now, the game is ready to spawn the next jellyfish, but since the first 2 spawns are both still alive, it has to wait until a slot opens up. Whenever a stingray spawns, it comes from the opposite side of the screen from your diver. But when a jellyfish spawns, it uses the RNG table to spawn in one of 16 possible zones on the screen. For example, this jellyfish just spawned in zone 14. When you kill a spawn, it will sometimes drop an item, like this crab. Shells are the game's currency, used to upgrade your boat. Stars are for points, which aren't important for this route. And crabs increase the speed of your diver. Items count towards the entity limit, so if left uncollected, they can delay the next spawn. The last thing you need to know about is jellyfish blocking. The game will not spawn a jellyfish in a zone that's too close to your diver. It will skip to the next legal jellyfish on the RNG table. The size of this blocked area is 7 zones wide, with your diver in the middle. For example, the game is spawning a jellyfish right now. The next several jellyfish that want to spawn on the RNG table are for zones 11, 11, 11, 12, 10, and 14. The diver is in zone 10, blocking zones 7 through 13. So the next 5 jellyfish get skipped and we get the jelly 14. So hopefully that all helps you understand why we're about to do the things we're going to do during the encounters. Now for the first encounter route. Your primary goal for this segment is to collect 4 shells and 2 crabs. We also need to end the encounter at a particular place on the RNG table, and then die with a stingray to our left so that the next overworld segment plays out the way we want it to. That's right, we're going to die on purpose. That's why we call it the death route. To accomplish these goals, we need to move our diver to particular zones, kill spawns in a particular order, and collect items as soon as possible. I have a few visual aids here to help with understanding why the encounter is being run the way it is. At the bottom, you'll see what's happening in the RNG system. Boxes will get highlighted as we go along to represent the lines of the table getting used, and the 16 zones are marked off under the game capture. Some numbers will be highlighted in red to represent the safe radius around your diver where jellyfish can't spawn. This is all just to reinforce why things have to happen in a certain order and why we have to be in certain positions. Now let's get started. At the beginning of the encounter, you want to move down and to the left to zone 7. Then turn around and continue sinking towards the bottom. A jelly 9 gets blocked, so the first jelly spawns in the 16 position. Shoot to kill it as you're sinking down. Jellyfish only take 1 shot to kill, and with practice, it's easy to time even a long-distance shot like this one, but you can fire off a few harpoons if you want. Continue to the bottom of zone 7 and wait until a ray swims on screen from the right. Start swimming towards the ray and shoot to kill it. Rays take 2 harpoons to kill. A jelly 14 will spawn while you're on your way. Shoot to kill it too, but make sure the ray dies first so that you get a crab to drop. Turn around and stay in zone 12 as you collect the crab dropped by the ray. Wait for a ray to come from the left, then start moving towards it. You want to wait before moving until the ray is fully visible, because a jelly will spawn next, and we want to block the jellies that are trying to spawn in zones 11, 12, 10, and 14, so that we get a jelly 5. This time you want the jelly to die first. Jellies have a faster death animation than rays, so if you shoot them at about the same time, the jelly should die first. If you killed them in the correct order, the jelly will drop a shell and the ray will drop a crab. Turn around and stop in Zone 5 to collect those items, and wait. Wait until the ray is on screen before moving right, because we want to block a jelly 3 and get a jelly 11. Kill the ray and the jelly. It technically doesn't matter which of them dies first, you'll get one shell either way. Stop and turn in Zone 12 while collecting the shell. Quickly fire off 2 shots to kill the ray that's about to come from the left. Wait until the ray starts dying before moving right because you want to block a jelly 9 to get a jelly 16. Shoot to kill the jelly for a shell, then turn around while collecting it. Wait until you see a ray from the left before moving. You should get a jelly 9 so long as you don't start moving too early and accidentally block it. Kill it and collect the shell it drops as you continue swimming towards the ray. Then crash into the ray and die. That's it. Pretty short and simple, at least compared to the second encounter, which we'll get to later. So now we move on to the second overworld segment. The goals here are to get into the next encounter on a tile that will get you a shallow screen. And you must also manipulate Jaws' movement to set him up for the next overworld segment. To accomplish these goals, you must perform 2 shimmies that combine to 14 frames or less, a delay to avoid hitting the wrong encounter trigger, and 2 more shimmies at the end to enter the encounter where we want to. This is the toughest overworld segment to get right, but with practice, you should be able to manage it. When the post-death jingle is ending, you can already be buffering a down input to leave port as soon as possible. Move straight down out of the port and go past the western cliff. When you pass the cliff, buffer left to start a shimmy and quickly turn right to complete it. In the example, the shimmy is being done in the second tile past the cliff, but you can do it in either. After the shimmy, continue right and then turn down around the area that I will be referring to as the white blob. When you get to the bottom right corner of the blob, buffer left to start another mid-turn shimmy, then turn right to complete it. Remember that these first 2 shimmies must combine to 14 frames or less, so it's very important that they be tight. After the shimmies, continue to the right for a while until you get to the end of this brown island. This is where you'll be doing your delay. If you were to continue moving without the delay, you would hit an encounter. Not only would that encounter be on a tile that would get us a deep screen, it's also not the trigger we want to hit to get the RNG we're looking for in the next encounter. No matter how fast your shimmies were, Jaws is moving at a consistent speed, and we need to wait for him to bounce off a wall and use up the RNG value that would trigger the encounter. All I can really say is that it's better to be a little late than a little early. Luckily, this is only 30 seconds into the run. Assuming you delayed correctly, you can move right and up to this corner of the island. This is the tile you want to get into the encounter on, but in order to trigger the encounter, you need to do a double shimmy. When moving up into the tile, you can buffer a right input and turn left. You then need to tap right and then left again to do another shimmy and trigger the encounter. You want to be careful not to start your second shimmy before finishing the first. If your shimmies are too slow, then Jaws won't be where we want him to be for the next overworld segment. But the window isn't too small, so you shouldn't have too much trouble with that part. If you ever see Jaws' fin pop out of the water during this segment, then your shimmies weren't fast enough. It is possible to get the wrong trigger on the right tile without seeing Jaws' fin, but that's rare. You'll know right away that something's wrong because the RNG will not be what you're expecting in the encounter. And now for the second encounter. Your goals for this segment are to collect 11 more shells to get what you need for upgrading your boat, and 2 more crabs to get to the max speed. You're also ending the encounter on a particular RNG value and making sure that you complete the encounter with the last entity, a shell, to the left of your diver. This encounter is much longer than the last one because you're not dying this time. You'll go through all 24 spawns to end the encounter. Just like before, this requires following a script of actions. The beginning of this encounter will feel a lot like the last one, with some subtle differences. We start off by swimming down and left to Zone 7 to block a jelly 4 and 9 so that we get a 16. Turn and shoot to kill the jelly while you're sinking down. Wait until the ray comes on screen before you start moving towards it because you don't want to block the jelly 13 that will be spawning. Kill the jelly and the ray, making sure the jelly dies first so that the ray will drop a crab. Turn to collect the crab in zone 12. Wait for the ray to swim on screen before you start moving left so that you can block the jelly 10 and 14 to get a 6. Then shoot to kill the jelly and ray so that the jelly dies first, and then turn and stop in zone 5 to collect a shell dropped by the ray. Wait until a little after the ray comes on screen from the right before you start moving because you don't want to block the jelly 10 from spawning. Kill the jelly and ray, making sure the jelly dies first, then turn and stop in zone 12 to collect the shell that the ray will drop. Wait until this ray comes on screen from the left. Shoot to kill it, but don't move yet. Then time a third shot to kill the jelly 5 that will come afterwards. Once the two start dying, fire off 2 more shots and start moving to the left. We want this second ray to die before we collect the first shell. If you collect the first shell before it dies, it's possible that the next jellyfish will spawn before the second ray finishes dying, and you won't get the shell you need it to drop. So stop and wait a little if you have to before collecting the first shell. After collecting the first shell, turn around quickly to shoot the jelly 10 that will spawn before continuing left to collect the second shell. Turn around and wait until you see the ray just starting to come on screen from the right before you start moving, because you want to block jelly 5, 8, 7, and 3 to get a jelly 12. Shoot to kill the ray and jelly together so that the ray dies second and drops a shell. Turn around to collect the shell and start moving left. You want to time your movement here just right because you want to block jelly 5, 8, and 7, but not block jelly 4. That means you have to be in zone 8 at the moment of the spawn. Swinging too far to the right when you turn might get you the jelly 5, and turning around too quickly might block the jelly 4. The turnaround should be on about the border of zone 11 and 12. Assuming you're going to get the jelly 4 like you want, kill the ray first and then the jelly so that the ray drops a shell. Turn while collecting the shell and head over to zone 6. We're trying to block the jelly 8 and not block the jelly 1. So zone 5 would be sufficient, but by turning around in zone 6, we can turn and move without stopping. Swim over to kill the jelly and collect the shell it drops while turning and moving right. Then try to kill this ray so that it drops a shell in zone 8. You want to be able to collect this shell quickly, so you don't want the ray to die too far away. But if it drops the shell too far to the left, you might block the jelly 4 that we want to get next. Go collect the shell and turn and shoot the jelly 4. Then continue left to collect the shell that it drops. Turn while collecting the shell and fire off 3 shots. The first 2 shots will kill the first ray, causing it to drop the last crab. The third shot is to slow the second ray down a little and make it easier to kill later. Now we're getting to the end of the encounter, and there are 2 ways that you can do it. First, I'll show you the fastest way that has some pretty tricky timing on some of the kills, but I encourage that you try it. It saves about half a second over the easier ending. Start heading to zone 9, collecting the crab in zone 8 along the way. This should block the jellies that want to spawn in zones 6, 5, and 8 and get you a jelly 2. Turn around in zone 9 and shoot to kill that jelly 2. As soon as the jelly starts to die, shoot 2 more harpoons to kill a ray that will hopefully be coming from that side. You need to stay on the right half of the screen just long enough to make sure the ray comes from the left, but you also have the ray coming from the right that's about to kill you. That's why we slowed him down with a shot earlier. Just when the ray is about to get you, move to zone 6 and turn around to finish it off with 1 more shot. The timing of these ray kills is very important. You need both rays to die before the game is ready to spawn the next jellyfish. But the left ray must die first so that the right ray will drop the shell. If you got the shell, start heading back to zone 9 and fire a shot to kill jelly 12, collecting the shell along the way. Turn around in zone 9 so that the last stingray comes from the left. As you start moving to the left, shoot to kill the last stingray to get the last shell. As you swim over to collect the shell, it's important that your diver be to the right of it. This is important for manipulating how Jaws moves when we get back to the overworld. You don't want to kill the ray too late and swim past it as it's dying, because then you'll be to the left of the shell. After collecting the shell, the encounter will end quickly, so you can already begin holding right so that your boat will be moving as soon as you get back to the overworld. If the tight timing of those two ray kills is giving you too much trouble, you can try this easier ending to the encounter instead. It will cost you about half a second, but will get you the shells you need and end the encounter on the correct RNG value so that the rest of the run will be the same. When you fire the shots to get the last crab and slow down the farther ray, don't swim to collect the crab. Instead, stop in zone 5 and shift your diver up a little. You want to be low enough that you'll still collect the crab, but high enough that you're able to fire a harpoon over the back of the ray. Right when the crab gets to you, fire a shot to kill Jelly 14. Shift back down to finish off the ray. Head to zone 9 to collect the shell dropped by the ray. Another ray will spawn from the right, but turn to kill a Jelly 3 first before killing the right ray. They shouldn't drop any items. Wait just a bit before moving left to kill the last ray to get the last shell. Once again, as you swim over to collect the shell, it's important that your diver be to the right of the shell. This is important for manipulating how Jaws moves when we get back to the overworld. You don't want to kill the ray too late and swim past it as it's dying, because then you'll be to the left of the shell. The encounter will end quickly, so after collecting the shell, you can already begin holding right so that your boat will be moving as soon as you get back to the overworld. You may be wondering why it's so important that you be to the right of the shell as you're collecting it. To understand that, you need to know more about the Jaws movement mechanics and the JDV, Jaws Distance Direction Variables. The JDV is a set of XY coordinates that Jaws uses to decide what direction he'll swim. Usually they measure the position of your boat relative to Jaws, which causes Jaws to move towards your boat. Imagine an L-shaped line from Jaws to you. If the long leg of the L is twice the length of the short leg or longer, Jaws will swim in that direction. If it's shorter than that, Jaws will swim diagonally into the L. If this would cause Jaws to swim into a tile he can't enter, he'll use the RNG table to decide if he turns clockwise or counterclockwise. But the JDV doesn't always point Jaws to your boat. For the first 128 frames of an overworld screen, the JDV points somewhere else. In the first overworld segment, the JDV starts as 00, which sends Jaws southeast. During an encounter, the JDV measures the position of your diver relative to the entity that was most recently created. At the end of the first encounter, there will only be one entity left, the stingray that we crash into when we die. Whatever the JDV is at the end of one segment carries over to the next. Imagine that your diver will become your boat, and the last entity will become Jaws. When we return to the overworld, Jaws thinks your boat is to his right. So that's why it's so important to be to the right of the last shell at the end of the second encounter, so that the JDV sends Jaws east when we get back to the overworld. This is the last overworld segment, but if everything has gone right up to this point in terms of maintaining the manipulation, it should be pretty easy. Our goal is to go from port to port leveling up our boat as quickly as possible without any extra tiles of movement, and manipulate Jaws so that he moves the way we want him to. To do this, we need to follow a direct path between the ports, and there will be only one shimmy to perform. If that all goes right, we'll be able to get into the Jaws fight as quickly as possible. For this last overworld segment, we'll be looking closer at what's happening on the RNG table, and how Jaws is moving at any given time as a result of the movement mechanics. The arrows in the table will be colored red when Jaws is moving towards the JDV set at the end of the previous segment, green when he's moving towards your boat, and yellow when he's moving as a result of a bounce. After a completed encounter, there's just a quarter second of black screen and you're back on the overworld, so you want to already be holding right when the second encounter is ending. Since we grabbed the last shell from the right, Jaws wants to move right at the beginning of the segment. This has him heading towards a land tile, so he bounces immediately. After moving out 2 tiles, Jaws bounces again. When you enter a tile and Jaws bounces on the same frame, which is what happened here, Jaws will use the RNG table first, before the encounter check. 2 tiles later, Jaws bounces again. This bounce uses up an RNG value that would have triggered an encounter. If you hit this encounter, then something earlier in the route went wrong. Maybe you didn't enter the second encounter quickly enough and Jaws moved to the wrong tile. Maybe you were on the wrong side of the last shell you collected. But if everything went right, you'll skip this encounter just by moving your boat normally. Turn up and head to the port. Jaws will bounce a couple more times before he starts heading towards your boat. Entering the port tile does not use up an RNG value. When you get to the port, you'll be getting your first upgrade, the receiver. Pretty much useless in this route, but it's the mandatory first upgrade. After that, we'll start heading back to the west port. The JDV is currently set to what it was at the end of the last Overworld segment, sending Jaws north for the first 128 frames. Go left out of the port to the green island, then head down. Make a turn around this corner of waves and head left. Continue left until you get to the white blob, then turn up. Continue up and get yourself to the port. When you get to this port, you'll upgrade to Power 2, doubling the amount of damage you'll deal to Jaws when you fight him. Now, when you leave this port, you need to do the one and only shimmy for this segment. It needs to be right after leaving port, in the first tile you enter. This is the kind of shimmy we used to do at the start of the run, the traditional method I described earlier in the tutorial. After the shimmy, start heading down. This Jaws bounce right here is why we did the shimmy. Without it, he would have turned clockwise, and we wouldn't get him in the position we want him in for later. Continue going down and turn around the white blob like in the second Overworld segment, but without the shimmies. If you stray too far off this path, it will affect how Jaws moves, because he's very close to you right now. After the blob, head right for the most direct path to the port. If you see Jaws' fin pop up right here, that means you did everything correctly. After that, keep heading right, turn up around the wave corner, then right to get to the port. When you get to the port, you'll get your final upgrade, bringing your boat to Power 3, which doubles again the amount of damage you'll do to Jaws in the Jaws fight. When you get back to the Overworld, you should only have to go out 2 tiles from the port and wait for Jaws to hit you. During the first 128 frames of an Overworld segment, when the JDV is locked, Jaws can't hit your boat. But thanks to the route, he's coming your way and will activate when he's right under your boat. You shouldn't see his fin or hear the receiver beep. By getting into the encounter on this spot in this way, we ensure that we'll be on a deep screen, which we want for a Jaws fight. And we know ahead of time that Jaws will come from the left since we manipulated the RNG up to this point. The Jaws fight itself isn't about RNG manipulation anymore, so I don't consider it a part of the route. I'll make a separate tutorial to discuss Jaws fighting strategies, but even though we're not worrying about controlling the RNG anymore, there is one last thing we want to keep in mind with regards to the RNG table. After the Jaws fight, there is a final screen that we call the Jaws charge. Jaws is swimming towards your boat, and you have to time the use of a strobe to cause Jaws to jump out of the water so you can stab him with the front of your boat. If you can keep track of the jellyfish you've seen, with the last one being the most important, you can predict how Jaws will move during the final charge. This Jelly 6 is the last jellyfish we get in the Taz that I'm using for this demonstration. While Jaws' life bar is flashing, you can look at some notes, a cheat sheet if you will, to see what the next 4 lines of the table in the Jaws charge column say. In this example, Jaws will apparently move continue, left, right, continue. Continue keeps Jaws moving in the same direction he already was, but if continue is first, he'll go straight. So that means Jaws will go straight, left, right, right. You can then move your boat accordingly to line up with where you know Jaws is going to be. That's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. I know it seems like a lot, but the route itself is pretty much only a minute. It's an intense minute for sure, but once you start getting consistently through it and grinding for Jaws fights, you'll be able to get some really good times. If you have any other questions, I'm always down to help. There's a link to my Discord channel in the YouTube description. Good luck on your runs, and I'll see you on the leaderboards.
Colonizer.